وقام المجاهدون فقيل لهم إن نفوس المحبين وأموالهم ليست لهم فهلموا.
I'm Robin Cresswell.
I'm Bernard Haeckel.
This week in the New Yorker, we've written a piece about the poetry of jihad, and we set that poetry in the context of the wider culture produced by militant jihadis. And the clip that we're watching right now is a pretty typical specimen of an ISIS propaganda clip in which we see the militants in action, and they are talking about their conquests and the ones to come and the righteousness of their cause. A lot of the videos that we see on the nightly news of beheadings or burnings are really made for foreign consumption, but there also is a lot of internal propaganda that the regime produces for itself, and probably the most important part, certainly the most interesting part and most intricate part of that propaganda is the poetry, which is really at the heart of this culture.
In the next set of clips, what we see are Islamic State fighters burning their passports and tearing their passports up. And what's interesting to note is in the background, you do have a cappella chanting of poems and anthems.
A kind of hatred for national boundaries is a common theme in jihadi culture, and including in its poetry, in which the speakers often express empathy for Muslims who are living sometimes very far away. There are also videos of them actually physically erasing national boundaries, the ones created in the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916.
The deletion of the national boundaries is illustrative of their desire to have a world in which there's only one unitary Islamic state called the Caliphate. So the sense of the world being divided into nation states, which is a Western idea, is one that they reject completely. In this next clip, you see a number of fighters relaxing probably after a battle, and what they're chanting is vernacular poetry, which is part of the entertainment and socialization process that they seem to engage in. And clips like this are very common on the internet, where you see them just relaxing, often in this kind of circles.
It's also noteworthy that the social context for poetry is not one of a solitary reader reading off of a page, but that it's really an occasion for sociability. So in the piece we talk a great deal about a woman named Ahlam al-Nasr, who has written a great deal of poetry, which has been published by media outlets associated with the Islamic State, and has also gained some sort of prominence within the movement, not just as a poet, but as an ideologue. And the clip that we're watching now is actually a recitation of one of her poems, not done by her, but done by other militants who are reciting it a cappella. The most famous of all jihadi poets is no doubt Osama bin Laden, who was particularly interested in verse, spent a great deal of time actually honing his technique, and wrote quite a few poems himself. Certainly part of bin Laden's charismatic leadership had to do with his eloquence, and part of that eloquence was the ability to write poetry, and to do so in a particular way, using classical meters, using classical forms. It was a particularly erudite kind of poetry that he wanted to write, and here he's actually reciting not one of his own poems, but one of another militant's.
دماؤكم جسر إلى النصر أحمر وبوابة منها إلى الخلد يعبر دماؤكم إعصار عزم وهمة ونار على أعدائنا تتسعر بها النفس من أوهامها قد تحررت وسوف بها الأقصى غدا يتحرر بإذن الله.
منك يا بشار غنائم المجاهدين.
In this last clip, you have a young militant. He's boasting about the ability of the Islamic State to have captured all these weapons from Bashar al-Assad's regime. But there's a style and a rhetorical ability that seems very natural, but in fact it's quite theatrical and very deliberate as a way of describing himself and showing himself off as a real fighter for Islam.
إني تذكرت والذكرى مؤرقة مجدا تليدا بأيدينا أضعناه أنا ذهبت إلى الإسلام في بلد تجده كالطير مقصوص جناحاه كم صرفتنا يد كنا نصرفها وبات يملكنا شعب ملكناه.
The culture itself is a deeply fantastical culture. It offers, I think, a certain kind of romance that the poetry is particularly good at conveying. The poetry suggests that the new Islamic State that's been set up in Syria and Iraq is a kind of frontier space where a new sort of state can be built and a new sort of Muslim also can discover him or herself and create themselves anew.
هذه معالم الخرس لو قامت إحداهن خطيبا فاغرا فاه